We all know the unspoken rule of buying first-generation Apple products. You are basically paying a premium to be a beta tester. And honestly, nothing proved that unwritten rule quite like the original iPhone Air. It was undoubtedly a gorgeous piece of hardware, an impossible 5.5mm slab of the future that made every other smartphone on the market look like a literal brick. But once the initial honeymoon phase wore off, early adopters quickly realized Apple had essentially sold them a concept car without a steering wheel. The battery life was a daily source of low-level panic. The thermal throttling turned the incredibly thin chassis into a pocket heater under any real workload, and giving users a single, compromised camera on a flagship-priced device was an absolute masterclass in corporate audacity. It was an engineering flex that fundamentally forgot it needed to function as a reliable daily driver. But if the latest tidal wave of supply chain leaks is accurate, Apple knows exactly how badly they miscalculated. The upcoming iPhone Air 2 is not just an iterative, safe update. It looks like a complete, top-to-bottom redemption arc that finally marries that futuristic design with actual, usable pro-level performance. Let us start with the most glaring insult of the first generation, the camera setup. Apple's initial obsession with keeping the back of the phone perfectly flush meant pushing the entire logic board up into the camera bump, leaving absolutely zero physical space for a secondary lens. You were paying top dollar for a camera system that could not even compete with the standard, entry-level iPhone. But the Air 2 is reportedly bringing a massive structural redesign to accommodate a brand new 48-megapixel Ultrawide Fusion camera. According to the leaks, they are retaining that razor-thin 5.5mm profile, but completely re-engineering the internal stacking to fit a high-end dual-lens array. This completely changes the entire identity of the device. Instead of being a purely aesthetic accessory for people who only care about how their phone looks resting on a restaurant table, it becomes a legitimate, highly capable tool. With dual lenses, you get high-resolution landscape shots, superior edge detection, and crucially, the ability to record spatial video. Apple is finally giving you the hardware to match the premium price tag, without sacrificing the aesthetic that justifies the Air branding in the first place. But cramming more advanced camera sensors into a tiny frame means absolutely nothing if the phone melts in your hand while processing the images. That brings us to the real secret weapon of the iPhone Air 2, the heavily rumored 2nm A20 Silicon. If you don't follow chip manufacturing closely, we need to talk about why a 2nm process is the absolute holy grail for ultra-thin devices. The original Air ran notoriously hot because standard processors generate heat that desperately needs to dissipate, and a chassis this thin has zero thermal mass to absorb it. By shrinking the fabrication down to 2 nanometers, the new A20 chip operates with a level of thermal efficiency that almost defies logic. It sips power, stays drastically cooler under heavy workloads, and provides desktop-tier processing for complex Apple Intelligence tasks without turning the back glass into a frying pan. And to make things even sweeter, reliable insiders are pointing to a massive bump up to 12 GB of RAM. Now, anyone who has used an Android flagship over the last 4 years might roll their eyes at 12 gigs. But in a heavily optimized iOS ecosystem, this is a monumental shift. It means you can finally run demanding background applications without them frustratingly refreshing the second you switch away. Apple has finally acknowledged that a beautiful phone still needs the memory to actually do multiple things at once. Now, let us address the massive elephant in the room, the one single factor that kept millions of rational people from buying the original model: battery anxiety. The assumption has always been that if you want a phone as thin as a stack of credit cards, you have to accept the battery life of a vintage iPod. But the supply chain is whispering something genuinely shocking right now. The iPhone Air 2 is currently tracking to deliver battery endurance that rivals the current, much thicker Pro models. You might be wondering how that is physically possible without making the phone thick. And the answer lies in a highly secretive two-part combination. First is the extreme, unprecedented power efficiency of that 2nm A20 chip we just talked about. But the real magic trick is the debut of Apple's long-rumored, custom-built C2 cellular modem. Third-party modems are notorious battery vampires, constantly hunting for cell towers and draining your power, while the phone is just sitting harmlessly in your pocket. By tightly integrating their own proprietary C2 modem, Apple can aggressively manage standby power draw. Leaks suggest this exact combination could squeeze an astonishing 2 extra hours of screen-on time out of a battery cell that has not actually increased in physical size. It is an absolute triumph of clever engineering over strict physics. However, the hardware alone does not tell the whole story, because Apple is reportedly completely rethinking how they actually sell this device to you. The original Air was priced like a premium flagship but performed like a mid-ranger, which deeply confused the market and alienated potential buyers. This time around, Apple is allegedly opting to use the standard A20 chip rather than a hyper-expensive Pro variant specifically to pull the retail price down to earth. By positioning it strictly between the base iPhone and the Pro Max models, they are creating a highly deliberate, almost genius psychological trap. You walk into the store intending to buy the standard phone, you see this impossibly sleek, futuristic slab sitting right next to it with nearly identical performance specs, and suddenly, spending that extra couple $100 feels completely justified. Furthermore, they are reportedly pulling the iPhone Air 2 entirely out of the traditional September launch window. Instead, they are targeting a solo, highly focused launch event in the spring of 2027. This is a brilliantly calculated move. It allows their heavy-hitting Pro models and rumored foldables to completely dominate the lucrative holiday season without any internal competition. Then, just as the tech hype dies down in the spring, they drop the most visually striking phone on the market to capture everyone who held out. It turns a single autumn release cycle into a relentless, year-round dominance strategy. If we step back and separate the signal from the noise here, the broader picture becomes incredibly clear. The original iPhone Air was a wildly ambitious prototype that Apple somehow convinced the general public to pay for. It proved the form factor was possible, but completely failed to make it practical. The iPhone Air 2, however, sounds exactly like the finished, uncompromised product we all wanted from the very beginning. By fixing the glaring camera deficit, solving the thermal and memory bottlenecks with the 2nm A20, delivering actual all-day battery life through their custom C2 modem, and drastically adjusting the pricing and launch window, Apple is systematically stripping away every single compromise. It transforms from a fragile, overpriced fashion statement into a relentless, ultra-portable powerhouse. It is exactly the kind of massive generational leap that forces you to reevaluate what you actually need from a daily driver. But the real question is whether Apple has burned too much goodwill with that first generation, or if this massive list of upgrades is enough to win you back. I really want to know your take on this. If they actually nail the battery life and the dual cameras, are you willing to give the ultra-thin form factor another chance? Or are you sticking with the traditional Pro models forever? Drop your thoughts, your skepticism, and your theories in the comments down below. Let's get a real conversation going. Thank you so much for hanging out and geeking out with me today, and I will see you all in the next video.